Hey folks, welcome back. It's a little chilly. It's supposed to get down in the 20s tonight, so I've been trying to cover things that need to be covered, bring in and put under cover what should be brought in and put under cover. And the list goes on and on and on. I'm still working on my tomatoes that I brought in the house about a month ago, 3 weeks ago anyway. And they were green when I brought them in. They're ripening off pretty good. I'm having more than a handful a day just to eat as a snack. And I always have some in my pockets. Just like during duck laying season, goose laying season, and back when I had guinea fowl and chickens, I always had eggs in my pockets or my pouches. And I'd always forget them. That makes a mess, right? And so don't tomatoes if you forget them and lean up against something, right? So, whatever, it just works. So, I come over here because I wanted to see what my woodpile looked like after we got almost an inch of rain, which is I am not complaining about. We really need the rain. But I wanted to make sure everything had been covered up and stayed covered up and everything looks good. I've really got to think about, I got a dime in this pocket, folks. Who knows? I really got to think about cleaning the wood sheds out so I can get the firewood in, right? But I just posted a video about yacon, or that's how I pronounce it, Y-A-C-O-N, and I love the root. It's very, very sweet. It's very fruity. And some of the questions between that one and walking up the other end of the bog, I thought I'd answer at least two questions. One question about the bog and the peat moss, because I showed what peat moss looks like in nature. It's really pretty green. It pulls up very easily, and I live on a peat moss bog. So way back years ago when my house was being built, that was all wooded, and that all the trees had to be cut where my house is sitting now. A pile of filth. This remained up to code because it is next to the bog and the flood zone and all of that. It had to be raised up per code so many feet, and then my house could be built. Also, a ditch had to be come down that side of the road, and it had a ditch, but it needed to be dug a little bit deeper, even though I have never seen water come down that ditch, folks. Never. So, I have no idea, folks. It runs plenty up in my garden. Trust me, it comes right straight down from my garden. But I think, anyway. So, my driveway was put in. My lower driveway was put in. My upper driveway was put in with 2 culverts. And it drains from the ditch and it drains downhill, right? Well, the bog, there's a cove. There's a low area in the bog. It's only considered a bog when there's water in that area, which typically it's part of what they call dry land when it's dry, and wetland when it's got a lot of water, right? Like when beaver or in the spring, runoff. So I'm talking about peat moss here, and why I don't harvest peat moss. One, I don't think it's legal to do so. You can buy it. I can buy it all in a big block. So I try to get the dry peat moss. Anyway, I'm talking about the comment about the peat moss. Why I don't harvest it. Well, there's 2 reasons. One, I don't think it's legal for me to do that here in Maine, whether I own the property or not. And 2, I can't do that even if I could, because when my house was being built, part of that had to be dug out for runoff and drainage for the ditch in the low-lying area, and they run into a bunch of peat moss. And they told me they run into a bunch of peat moss And it was high on the ground, but it was still peat moss, still the same, because this used to be a mile underwater here back in the glacial days, right? So it said it had to be dug out and asked me where I wanted it put. I'm like, well, if it's peat moss, well, just put it right up there. I'm going to have a garden right up there. So 1 scoop was all that was needed to make that area the way it needed to be per code. So 1 scoop was brought up and dumped where my garden was going to be. Well, after it was dumped, it was probably 2 days. I hadn't moved in yet. It was probably 2 days later, and I went up to look at the peat moss. It looked beautiful. It was nice and black, and it was wet, obviously. But it had this horrible stench to it, folks. And it was just absolutely beautiful. But me standing by it just for less than 30 seconds, folks, less than a minute anyway, I started getting a headache. I never get headaches, folks. I think I've had maybe 3 headaches in all my entire life. I started getting a headache, and I'm like, well, that is odd. Just as soon as I come up to this pile of peat moss, I started getting a headache. So I walked away from it, and within a half hour, my headache dissipated. The next day, I walked up there again, and just as soon as I got to that pile again, I started getting a massive headache. So I did some research. And even if it was 1,000 years ago, there was a plant in that bog that once grew, that apparently no longer grows, but once grew, that I may have had an allergic reaction to if I lived here 1,000 years ago. Those 1,000-year-ago plants, if there was even a few spores left in it, because the spores can live for many, many years submerged in peat moss. If some of those spores were exposed to air and I am allergic to it or very sensitive to it, I could get that type of reaction. Now, peat moss bog does put off a lot of natural peat moss gas because it's always decomposing, right? Even though it's underwater, it's decomposing, and as things decompose, it emits gas, right? I'm not talking propane gas. I'm talking bog gas. Now, if you get in certain areas in Maine, and I'm sure it's everywhere else, but if you get in certain areas of Maine where it's wet and there's a bunch of peat, or the circumstances are just right where things are decaying, you could have a lime green glow to that area, and that's just the gases coming out of that wet area, and that's what happens here at the bog. Usually when it happens here that I can hear it from inside my house is after a very hot day and the nights are still, it's very dark out, but there's no breeze and everything is whisper quiet. I can hear the gases, the gas bubbles coming up and popping on the bog surface. So it does, it forms a bubble, that's this gaseous bubble, and it comes up and it breaks the surface of the water and releases, right? So the bog down here, living by it, doesn't bother me at all. I can kayak it, doesn't bother me at all. But if that peat moss is stirred up, I'm really, really bothered by it. So, don't know, folks, don't know. So there's 2 reasons. One, I don't think it's legal to harvest peat moss without a permit, even though I own it. And 2, it bothers me. Now, the peat moss that I get in a bag has been treated. It's been heated. Everything is basically dead. Peat moss is inert. The only purpose for me in my garden, or me in my bathroom system, is the peat moss, because it is inert, it absorbs moisture and it absorbs odor. So in my bathroom buckets, I can use that as cover material and my bathroom buckets don't stink. My compost doesn't stink. Even when I dump my buckets, it doesn't stink. Now, as far as the garden, it doesn't add any nutrients, not really, because they've all been killed off in the peat moss making process. But if I put the peat moss in damp or put it on the fall and allow it to become damp in my garden, mix it in the spring, it'll be moist and it'll keep my plants moist longer, and I won't have to water as much. It'll hold more moisture. So if we get another drought, that will help my plants an enormous amount. Now, one area of my garden, I put peat moss in the fall. That next year was the year that we got torrential rains all summer long, and it killed my plants because my plants drowned in the peat moss soil mix because it was just too wet. What do you do, folks? What do you do? So that answers, I hope, answers the question about the peat moss and why I don't harvest the peat moss in this bog here and why I buy it. Is peat moss going up? I think it's 3.3 cubic feet in a block. I think that's what it is. That's what I get. It's like, it used to be like $12. Now it's up to like $26. So will it keep going up? Oh, probably, right? But one block, 3.3 cubic, what is it? I don't know, a block anyway. I don't know if it's feet. I don't know if it's yards. I have no idea. It's pretty compressed. It lasts me a year. And like I was telling Just Krista, if I take sawdust from the sawmill, which is what I've been doing, that's what I was doing, hauling in that wagon in the other video, is hauling sawdust in the wagon down this way. It's just going in piles. It's going in piles for my bathroom material. So I can take a bucket of sawdust from the sawmill, and I can take a bucket of peat moss from the peat moss block and mix it together. That will extend my peat moss for that peat moss will go for a year. But if I mix it with sawdust, half and half, that block will go 2 years. So even at $26 for a block, if I mix it with sawdust, it'll go me 2 years. That's $13 a year. I'm not going to complain about that at all. So I'm making piles for sawdust. I'm putting the sawdust into buckets. The sawdust that's in piles and will be in piles and have been in piles, I put a tarp over it and weight the tarp down. And they're in the sun. So in the wintertime, and with a dark tarp, and the pile being covered with the dark tarp in the sun, on warm sunny days, I can lift that tarp up, at least scrape off enough sawdust if I run low to fill a bucket, cover it back up, bring it inside. That bucket, if it's just sawdust, will give me a week. If it's mixed with peat moss, that might give me a week and a half, maybe. I don't know. It's got to be pretty close. So I can have piles of sawdust here. Will it freeze solid? It will freeze probably 2 feet down anyway. The very center of the pile might not freeze because sawdust is an insulator, but it's breaking down through that frozen 2 feet of sawdust. That is quite a chore. So that's why I make sure that I have enough sawdust in buckets, so I can grab a bucket. I'm looking at a 5-gallon bucket of sawdust right here with a lid. If it freezes, I can bring it in a week before, set it in my bathroom. It'll thaw in my bathroom even with the cover on it, and I'll just have to plan ahead that way. So there's a thing on peat moss, and I'm running out of time to get into other topics that I wanted to answer or respond via video on your comments. It's been hard enough making the video. It's been hard enough trying to take the time to sit down and respond to the comments, because when I sit down with the intent to read and respond to comments, if I'm sitting down, I fall asleep, folks. That's just the way this life is. When you're busy, you're busy. When there's downtime, you tend to zonk right out, especially if you're out in the cold and going into a nice warm house. You get really sleepy, and if I sit down in my recliner, I know I'm out, right?